Given the appalling case numbers in the lead up to Christmas, it was no surprise that England spent January in lockdown. In the early half of the month, we saw higher case numbers and deaths than ever before. It was morbid. These case numbers weren't just a bit higher. They completely blew old records out of the water, and the daily death toll broke through and then sat comfortably above 1,000 for an extended period of time. Towards the end of the month though, they began to drop off again, and the mass vaccination effort ramped up to impressive levels. For once, I'm actually proud of my country. We have done a terrible job of managing this pandemic, but I can't fault the vaccination effort. England is vaccinating hundreds of thousands of people a day. We're doing better than almost anywhere else, leading the charge towards immunity. Old and vulnerable people are first, then it'll slowly go down the risk categories until it finally reaches young, healthy people such as myself. My granddad has been vaccinated, and my dad was the other day too. I probably won't get mine until the summer, and right now that still feels like a long way away. Looking back to the start of this pandemic, how did I expect for it to pan out? I was honestly hopeful for Christmas. I figured that by then we'd have got this whole lockdown thing sussed, but that clearly didn't happen. This pandemic has followed a depressingly similar trend to how the Spanish flu did 100 years ago. I think I hoped for a vaccine by Christmas, but even though we managed it, I underestimated how long it would take to be rolled out. I used to check up on the cases and deaths per day over on the Coronavirus UK subreddit, but now I enjoy checking out the vaccination numbers just as much, watching as it rapidly approaches 10 million. And those 10 million are the most vulnerable in the country, the most likely to die. It's great to know that things are moving. Give it a month for immunity to kick in and death rates should drop almost all the way down. There's still been some umming and ahhing about the effectiveness of each type of vaccine. 2 doses should provide better results than just 1, but the government has decided to delay the second dose in order to get more people the first one. It seems like even if you do get COVID after having been vaccinated, you're less likely to get serious symptoms, and very few, if any, people are hospitalised from these lesser cases. So that's all looking very positive. New variants of the disease are flaring up, the one in South Africa being of particular concern, but the vaccines seem effective at keeping even these variants at bay. It's great news all round, and I'm cautiously adjusting my expectations from dealing with this to some degree forever to maybe not having to worry much about COVID in England after this year has ended. But until that happens, it's lockdown. But what is lockdown? This month certainly hasn't felt like the first one did. Roads are still busy, shops are too. You can go out for exercise. That pretty much covers everything I do normally. People are working from home more than they were before this whole thing started, but when it comes to public spaces, there's certainly not the fear and caution that there was back in the first lockdown. I got a bit concerned at the start of this month, since the cases in my city were worse than it had ever been last year. But case numbers are plummeting again, and hopefully this time for good. And it's just a matter of waiting it out as things slowly return to normal in a few months' time. But there was one thing this month that changed lockdown for me. I have not arranged any social stuff since this started. I get involved when my housemates do, because I don't see how that's going to change anything. But for the first time, I decided to meet up with someone and to have a nice walk around. The person I chose had recently tested negative, and we stuck to the outdoors. It was just a way of getting out of the house and having some sort of social life. And sure enough, the next day that person tested positive. I didn't even hear it from them. It took somebody else to inform me. Then I had to do the work of figuring out what I was meant to do. Since we had been outside, that person hadn't even thought of putting me down as a contact. It showed me just how broken the system is, and also how any attempt I make to have a social life must be punished immediately and in the most brutal fashion possible. And it was tempting just to be like, oh well, and to carry on. It really was. Maybe it was a false positive. Maybe being outside and distanced was enough to make it okay. Maybe, since that person wasn't showing symptoms, the risk was low anyway. All these things crossed my mind as ways of avoiding having to intentionally go out of my way to limit my quality of life. It really was tempting to treat this as a practice run and to be more cautious in the future. But I did the right thing. I phoned 119, I almost immediately got through to someone, mentioned what had happened. They asked questions like, when did you meet? When did they get tested? And how long were you with them? And were you within 2 meters for any period of time? And again, it was tempting to say that I wasn't within 2 meters, since we were outside and just walking along. But I said I was, and I was told that I should self-isolate for 10 days. It felt voluntary. A soft self-isolation with nothing stopping me from stepping out of that door and into the world. The system is broken. I literally had to find out that I had been in contact with someone positive, and then had to call myself out several times for being irresponsible before I was told to self-isolate. I'm the only person I know who uses the COVID app, and I really do wonder how many people would have voluntarily self-isolated if in the same circumstances. I thought the system was flawed before, but having experienced it firsthand, no wonder it doesn't work. It requires people to do the right thing, at no benefit to themselves. Those 10 days I spent in self-isolation really did feel like a long time. It was just like being back in the first lockdown again, worrying about food supplies. What would happen if I showed symptoms on the 10th day? How long would the supplies I had need to stretch on for? Milk was the first thing to go, then the frozen stuff ran out, and I was down to porridge oats and beans. Luckily, there are delivery apps, and a takeaway and grocery shop towards the end of that kept it quite manageable. But I will say, it was tempting to go on a midnight run just to get some sort of exercise with minimal risk to others. But I didn't do it. Since then, the person I hung out with has tested negative again. Maybe it was a false positive, but you can't assume that at the time, can you? And to find out that person had been offered the vaccine a while back, but had turned it down due to concerns about it. I think I self-isolated properly. I started the 10 days on the day we met up. Maybe you're supposed to start it the following day, but then wouldn't that be 11? Who knows? I think I did okay. And when that 10th day came, I excitedly went on a rainy walk and came back in a brilliant mood which lasted all day. It's amazing how great the norm can feel when you've abstained from it for a while. And it's made me realise that maybe this has affected my well-being more than I've been letting on. If I was at school or in a horrible office job, I genuinely believe my life would have been made better by this pandemic forcing me to work from home, at least partially, but I would still have missed seeing my friends. But since I'm a YouTuber working from home in my room all the time, it's made me realise how much I clung on to what little social life I had, both inside and outside the house. It has taken away the little habits and routines I used to have and has forced me to find new ones. And I really hope I get back some of what I used to have once this is over, because I'm sorely missing some aspects of my life pre-pandemic. Again, we come to the topic of mental health. How people have handled this pandemic will determine what they get out of it. If you've played by the rules and have sacrificed stuff, then coming out the other end will feel great. But if you've ignored the rules and have carried on as normal, you probably won't feel much different once this ends. And Jehovah's Witnesses, who might be hoping that this is the beginning of the end, might actually be really sad once it's over, if the world ends up carrying on as normal. This was just one of the silly thoughts that I had while stuck inside for 10 days. For the past few months, I've dedicated about an hour a day to deleting my older comments that I've posted on YouTube. Google deliberately makes this as difficult and as long-winded as possible. You'd think they could have some kind of bulk delete button or something like that to help, but it seems the technology for that just isn't quite there yet. So I'm going to stick at it, deleting one post at a time, in fear that if I don't, my past self could be used against future me at some point. And doing this has allowed me to relive my past, one day at a time. I've been working backwards, starting with my most recent comments. I actually look back fondly at the first lockdown when everything was scary and new. It was exciting, thrilling even, to step outside. And I made a big deal of stripping once I got home again and showering before daring to touch anything. This time around it hasn't been anywhere near as exciting, probably because it's January, the coldest, darkest month of the year. I went back further through memory lane and remembered how much stuff just happens that I've had to sacrifice since this started. Family gatherings for birthdays, Christmas, hanging out with friends, going on a silly little walk somewhere that you don't think anything of at the time. Even if the pandemic hasn't stopped this stuff entirely, it's added an extra roadblock to it, and I can't wait to have that lifted again. I have presents sat in my room that were intended for people that I haven't been able to meet in a long time. It still doesn't seem strange to see TV shows where people are in close proximity to each other not wearing masks. But with recent stuff, I've started wondering how they've done it. Did they have to quarantine together in a bubble for weeks before filming? Or are we still seeing stuff that was filmed before the coronavirus took hold? My spam emails have changed too. I now get fake emails claiming to be from the NHS, asking me to book a vaccination appointment. Proof that humanity isn't ever afraid to cash in on the latest tragedy for personal, selfish benefit. I didn't really want to cover anti-vax again this month, but I do have something to say about it. Almost overnight, the reason everybody has started using to dismiss the COVID vaccines is that they claim not to be anti-vax, but are in this one specific instance because these vaccines have been rushed out and nobody really knows the long-term effects. It's an annoying stance on the topic, since obviously you can't dismiss the possibility of long-term health effects without literally using a time machine. At some point, you just have to trust the knowledge of the thousands of experts working on them and the extensive testing on them that has been done. And, the fact that there are no proven health problems with the vaccines, while the disease these are for is proven to inflict serious short and long-term damage. So for these people to dismiss vaccines in fear of unknown long-term problems is kind of insidious, especially when I stalk them online and discover that they seem to be doing more than just dismissing these vaccines. Their comment and favourited video history normally leads down a hole towards COVID denial and government conspiracies. I have decided that these people are lost. There is no point in trying to discuss it with them because their mind has been made up, no matter how much they dress their stance up as being reasonable or open to discussion. But in some good news, despite my own experiences with anti-vaxxers, England leads the charge in being the country with the most people willing to be vaccinated. At 81%, it's well above Germany with 59%, America with 47%, and France with just 46%. Anti-vax is now the majority in some countries. What timing? December 2019, possibly just before coronavirus reached New York, I was there on my last holiday abroad before this whole mess started. It was amazing to finally go somewhere with tall buildings, and to step foot in places I had previously only seen in movies or in Deus Ex. I now look back at those memories with painful nostalgia because seeing this footage reminds me that everything has changed. It sounds cliched, but some days I forget how much it has. It's been almost a year now, a year of missed opportunities and encounters. And sure, we've done other things instead. Some good will come out of it, but so much has been lost. I sympathise most for people in their first year of university, it must really suck for them, but everybody's had to give up something. And it's getting to the point where it's become a sizable chunk of our lives, and it's not over yet either. But I feel like we knew January was going to suck, and I like to think that we've got through the worst of it now in England, and that this is the turning point when things start to look brighter again. I don't have much hope for the spring. I'll be happy if lockdown is eased enough that I can get out for a few walks. I'm holding on to summer as being the start of the return to normality, in part thanks to the vaccine's charge towards herd immunity and also in part thanks to the warmer weather. There were times last year, just after lockdowns were lifted, where it almost felt normal again for a while, even without a vaccine. So this year's got to be at least as good as that, surely. It's still too early to book holidays or to plan ahead, but give it a few months and we might be getting there.